Hi. Okay, this is A New Nigeria with Olawale Oluwade. I'll be speaking briefly on what I've titled President Muhammadu Buhari, an addendum. President Muhammadu Buhari, an addendum. I am a realist, less emotional, especially when it comes to issues regarding leadership and governance. I have the innate ability to not be swayed by mass hysteria or sentiments. So, as the fawning eulogies, embellished tributes, and gratuitous adulations on President Buhari's passing begins to peter out, it is apt at this juncture that I remind Nigerians of some key issues that constitute significant missed chances of Buhari's government to reset a few of Nigeria's perennial, failures or misfortunes. First of this, I recall in the lead up to the 2019 general elections, I had recommended publicly on several television networks that the federal government privatize the moribund four refineries, adopting the NLNG, that is the Nigerian liquefied natural gas business model, that is the federal government relinquishing controlling stake in this and handing them over to the international oil companies, IOCs. I argued variously, strongly, that entrenched forces in the NNPC will never allow the refineries to work since it's since become their cash cow. Happily, the People's Democratic Party presidential candidate in 2019, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, seized upon this as a key campaign policy issue. But Nigerians excoriated Alhaji Atiku to no end, accusing him of seeking to gift these refineries to his cronies. On the other hand, President Buhari, after he won his re-election, for 8 years that he was president, he doubled as petroleum minister. And on the advice of his NNPC Group Chief Executive Officer, Engineer Mele Kyari, and then Minister for State, Mr. Timi Pere Silva, rather than privatize the refineries as advised, instead engaged a strange Italian firm to commence another turnaround maintenance, or what they called rehabilitation project, of both the Warri and Port Harcourt refineries at a whopping cost of 1.2 billion US dollars. All entreaties against this was dismissed as unpatriotic. I remember the people at NNPC actually began sponsoring WhatsApp messages and media, whatever, against me and a few others who were against it. Not even the views, the widely respected views of former President Olusegun Obasanjo against, that process of doing turnaround maintenance was swayed President Buhari. They continued. Tragically,
a seamless process of selecting core investors to take over these assets and run it profitably. I told you last week, there is a model that works in Nigeria, the NLNG. It works. It is owned 49% by the federal government through the NNPC, 25.6% by Shell BP, 15%, by Total, and then 10.4% by ENI International. Guess what, Mankwe? While Port Harcourt Refinery was built 1989 and has run losses all these years, in 2013 to 2017, 363 million US dollars was spent on turnaround maintenance, producing zero. The National Assembly debated it, investigated it. Now, guess what is happening at NLNG? From 2004 to 2019, NLNG has paid to the federal government dividends of 18 billion US dollars. You heard me right, 18 billion US dollars. That's not all. They've paid taxes of 9 billion US dollars. That's not all. They've paid to the federal government for feedstock gas, 15 billion US dollars. Total, 42 billion dollars has accrued to the federal government of Nigeria since the inception of NLNG, while the refineries have produced losses over losses over losses in the same period.
Let me get you correctly.
Yes.
You are not quarreling with the amount of money that has been earmarked for this rehabilitation?
Oh, I am quarreling against it. It's a waste. If I'm going to be modest, I could call it corruption, actually. I have a big issue against it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Tragically, even the President Tinubu administration continued in this path of grand deceit and corruption, all to no avail. Sadly, here we are, after several billions of dollars, maybe 5 billion, as of the last count, failed promises and dashed expectations, Nigeria has finally admitted the refineries be privatized. The new CEO of NNPC, Bayo Julari, came out to say the refineries can't be fixed and so they'll be privatized. But the question remains, the billion-dollar question: who's going to account for the wasted billions of dollars? Who? Of course, Nigerians. Nigerians, bear the brunt of that. That's the first one. Missed opportunity. Missed one terribly. Second, missed chance. Number two, in 2018, President Buhari announced his goal of lifting 10 million Nigerians yearly out of poverty and so reduce the poverty burden to the barest minimum. Well, again, on several television interviews, I critiqued this as mere sloganeering, devoid of any coherent strategic framework or policy underpinning. There was one such engagement I remember, particularly with the president's senior special assistant on media, Mr. Gaba Shehu.
Yes.
Thank you, Mokwe. On a lighter note, I told Malam Shehu that there was no acknowledgement of you and I, a couple of weeks, we had discussed here,
Yes.
and I specifically mentioned about it's not bad borrowing from China,
Yes.
but I would rather we learn, get the know-how,
Yes.
how China moved 850 plus million people out of poverty in less than maybe 40. The reason why China is important is because what China has achieved is nothing short of a 21st century miracle, Now, that being said, I talked about this. I mentioned two things China did. More than two anyway, but majorly that in the SIP program of this administration, I said there's no master plan. There's no master plan. And secondly, there's no database. Interesting, because now, let me also say this, Malkwe. I see in the speech also, I see a philosophical, shift, as it were. Now, hitherto, the president's main mantra, as it were, even though there were three main campaign promises, when it came in 2015, insecurity, economy, and anti-corruption. I'm sure every Nigerian knows that even if we woke up the president dead of night, the first thing that comes out of his mouth is anti-corruption. So there are this group of people, that fed into the mind of the president that once you deal with anti-corruption, all of Nigeria's problems just disappears. And so he ran with that for 4 good years. Now suddenly we realize that even if, I'm telling you, Malkwe, if you bring Professor Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner in economics, Professor Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize winner in economics, even go resurrect John Maynard Keynes, another master of economics. If you don't deal with this mass poverty, Nigeria can't get out of the woods. Never. Now, so suddenly, I don't know how, but I'm glad that finally our president or the government seems to realize that the number one, because I told you here on this program, 3 existential problems confront not just Nigeria, but the economy. Mass poverty. You cannot have 100 million, close to 100 million people, extreme poor, and then you want to build a nation. How is that going to happen? Because
so that you don't lose your train of thought, and we're able to follow you successfully. You've talked about poverty being one of the issues.
It is number one issue.
Number one. What is the second issue?
Unemployment. Unemployment.
And the third one?
The third one is security. On your program, I don't know why, maybe you forgot. I told you they are conjoined triplets. That's what I used. They are interwoven because they're pulling and pushing each other. Mass poverty.
Again, unlike the oil sector saga, the Humanitarian Affairs Ministry, specifically set up under Buhari, became a huge sleaze pipe where Nigeria's wealth was being stolen, diverted, and looted in the most mindless manner. As I speak here, nothing is heard of either the investigations or prosecutions of the perpetrators of this monumental, economic crimes. And isn't it a perplexing and cruel twist of irony that as mass poverty and hunger ravaged northern Nigeria, President Buhari, who for 8 years was president and from northern Nigeria, had no inkling, ideas, or solutions to this menace? Because poverty, hunger, maternal infant mortality, and all of this, 10 to 20 million out of school children, primary school out of school children, primary secondary school, the bulk of them, 60-70% of them in the north, has now, all of this has metastasized to the banditry, to the menace of terrorism, banditry, kidnapping, and all of that ravaging, northern and all indeed the rest of Nigeria. President Buhari for 8 years had no solution, to this problem. And third issue I'll talk about, and perhaps the most symbolic and defining example of Africa's, not just Nigeria, Africa's abject leadership debacle. President Buhari, throughout his 8 years presidency, spent the total of about 250 days in London hospitals receiving Medicare or health care. Eventually, it was in one of these hospitals in London that he died. In all of the years, 8 in total, he was in office in this Fourth Republic. He had neither the drive nor motivation to build 1 or 2 hospitals that was good enough to cater to the healthcare needs of himself and his colleagues. At least build 2 world-class hospitals. So, as of the time President Buhari passed, last week, both himself, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, former head of state in 1988 to 1999, Maman Daura, Alhaji Maman Daura, President Buhari's great older nephew, were all hospitalized in a London hospital. The question is, how difficult is it to build a hospital? Can somebody make this make sense to me? How difficult it is to build 2 truly world-class hospitals, one in the north and one in the south. Since we like, north, south, dichotomy and all of this. If President Buhari wanted, he could have built 8, 1 each year. He was in office. But at least build 2. But he didn't. He did not. And can anyone recall any serious country's leaders receiving health care abroad and dying insane? And we wonder why nobody takes African leaders serious. I mean, last week I was glued to the TV screens, seeing President Donald Trump of the United States lambasting and treating 5 African presidents like errant school children. Even having the temerity to ask the president of Liberia where he learned to speak such good English. Will President Trump dare say that to the President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine? Would he dare to say that, to the President of Israel, that he welcomed with great, diplomatic generosity and all of that? Now, in contrast to President Buhari, Mr. Benedict Urama, President of the Afrexim Bank, had serious health issues recently, some years ago, and upon his recovery, he decided to deploy his institution's resources to building centers of healthcare excellence in a few countries in Africa, beginning with Nigeria. And it's almost commissioned, if I remember very well. So, like I said in my first video when President Buhari passed, my forthcoming book will give detailed, accurate, factual, and verifiable accounts of his stewardship, with the goal, the ultimate goal, of separating facts from fiction, and to ensure generations to come will understand how those who were given enormous opportunities to build a great country squandered these opportunities so carelessly. There are over 230 million Nigerians. Let's even say 200 million. And we have only 5. We have only a few men who have been presidents, for longer than, 5 years, as you will see shortly. And what did they do? Now, what was witnessed yesterday, July 15th, the burial procession, all of that, what we witnessed is the first burial of the 5 men who have governed Nigeria for cumulative 41 years out of 65 years since Nigeria's independence. General Yakubu Gowon governed Nigeria for 9 years, 1966 to 1975. General Olusegun Obasanjo, 11 years, the longest, 11 years, from first 1976 to 79, and then later on 1999 to 2007. Then President Babangida, military head of state Babangida, from 1985 to 1993. Buhari, that just passed, first as general, January 94 to August 1985, and then second coming from 2015, May 29, 2015 to May 29, 2023. Then, of course, President Goodluck Jonathan, May 10th, 2010 to May 29, 2015. These 5 men, have governed Nigeria 63% of the entire, 65 years of our independence. So, the reason why I went into this brief of history is that the IDB book launch in February was February or March, thereabouts. That book launch was a teaser and a preface of such in this emerging phenomenon. We're going to be saying this because, remember, the same effect of this Buhari's burial was what we witnessed when IBB did his book launch. It was so much hype, so much noise, so much news. It was such a newsworthy event that captivated the whole nation. Was riveted about the entire thing because it was like this great man came out from nowhere, and everybody gathered there, just like what we witnessed yesterday. So this is an emerging phenomenon. I certainly expect this, even on a grander scale, when somebody like IBB or Obasanjo, goes home and all of that, you'll see that in the coming months and years. And I pray for their longevity. I'm not wishing anybody to die, Now, so the drama, razzmatazz, and hype, we witnessed was basically, in my opinion, accentuated and escalated by the impact of technology, but particularly social media. To my mind, most who stayed glued to their television sets watching did so out of sheer amazement and wonderment at the futility and ephemeralness of life. That, wow, this great man, Muhammadu Buhari. So this is just all it's all about. This man that presided, that loomed larger than life. Handsome man, clean man, almost worshipped, had a royal carriage to himself, and then we saw him wrapped in ordinary clothes and lowered in a mud grave. So, for instance, the most powerfully profound moment of the entire ceremony yesterday, to my mind, was the picture of President Buhari's body wrapped in a simple white cloth, being lowered in a mud-soaked earth with, I almost said his arrogant successor, but let me say, with his successor watching raptly, as you can see on your screen. That was the most powerfully profound picture of the entire, event. That was extremely poignant. I hope someone can ask President Tinubu and all the numerous pharaohs and emperors, all the demigods, the young Hitlers and Mussolinis all over the place, strutting around, playing God. I hope somebody can ask them, have you learned any lessons from what we all saw yesterday? And even, ordinary citizens like us, have we all learned any lessons? That at the end of everything, that is what it's all about. 6 feet. I was dumbfounded. I was awestruck because in my religion and parts of Southwest where I come from, especially the South, not just Southwest, we do burial with so much fanfare and so much ceremony. We dig the grave, big grave, 6 feet but big, and then we'll put marble, even tiles, ordinary cement, and then we'll buy a coffin, we'll put the body, we even wear clothes, sometimes ceremonial clothes on the corpse, and before we put the corpse in a coffin, and then the coffin is lowered in the grave, and then there's so much, ceremony around, and you bury it and all of that. But what I saw yesterday was stunning to me. It jarred my senses. Mind-blowing stuff. So, as I wrap up, most of my adult life, especially in the last 3 decades, three subjects have engaged my time and laser focus. Three subjects in particular. Number one, the Bible. The Bible. Why? Because I need to understand the fourth dimension. Because there's a dimension greater and more powerful, more real than even this physical world. So I need to understand that, God and all of that, Second subject that has engrossed my attention in the past 3 decades: leadership and governance. Leadership and governance. Why? To understand the paradox of Africa, but particularly Nigeria's colossal underdevelopment, the mind-blowing failure that is Africa and Nigeria. I need to understand it. So I've studied leadership and governance like never before. And then last subject I've studied is economics, because ultimately leadership and governance is all about the efficient management of a country's political economy. So I know a leader from thousands of miles away. I can smell, genuine leadership from thousands of miles away. I teach leadership, not just being a student. I teach leadership to directors in the civil service of blue chip companies. I know what leadership entails. President Muhammadu Buhari was more suitable as a cleric or emir, a traditional ruler or a religious leader, without sentiments or ill will of any sort, no ill feelings whatsoever. President Buhari ought never to have been president of a country, especially a country such as Nigeria. Never. And before you say God made him president, if you think or say that, you are an illiterate, regardless of whatever certificates you bandy around. No. A handful of men made President Buhari to become president, and for their selfish reasons too. If you go around thinking God made somebody president, you are a clown. You are an illiterate. Because you might as well say God made the terrorists to be killing people as they are doing, the bandits to be perpetrating their heinous crimes, and the robbers to go and rob. You might as well stretch it to say that. But why did I say President Buhari shouldn't have been president of Nigeria? Why? There are a number of reasons, but I will speak on one or two here. In the book, I will detail all of this in my forthcoming book. Once you assume leadership of a diverse community of people, and it doesn't have to be a village or a town or a local government or state or country. It could be a club, it could be a social gathering, it could be a church. Once you assume leadership of a community, 5-10 people, guess what? It behoves you to die to your former identity, tribal identity, ethnic identity, particularly religious identity. If you fail at this, you would fail in everything else. And so it was with President Muhammadu Buhari. The immutable laws of God and leadership demands that you rise as a leader. You rise above primordial sentiments. President Buhari failed in this woefully. And tragically, his successor is treading the same path. Now, add to this issue of not rising above, primordial sentiments. President Buhari never seemed to know anything happening around him, however egregious those issues were. If you say, "Oh, Mr. President, they've killed, headsmen have killed people in Plateau or Benue or Taraba, or people went to Zaria and massacred Shiites," President Buhari will feign, innocence and tell you, "I didn't know, nobody told me," and gullible Nigerians believed him. It was his lack of awareness of goings on around him was such a very convenient alibi. What sort of leadership is that? A good leader takes responsibility. A good leader takes responsibility even for the failures of your subordinates, even when you are not even aware, because to say you don't know That's an egregious lack of leadership. However, the spiritual part of me, remember I said the first thing I've studied about 5 chapters. So the spiritual part of me adores President Buhari. His asceticism, his piety, self-discipline, and particularly his royal courage. These are virtues I greatly admire and adore in anybody. And I found these virtues in President Buhari. Let me tell you, a lot of our traditional rulers, and religious rulers can learn from President Buhari how to be royal, both in demeanor and courage. Indeed, many who occupy lofty public positions in our society are not better than common peasants. They are like barbarians. So finally, what's the conclusion of this whole matter? Number one, to whom much is given, much will definitely be demanded, both here, but especially in the hereafter. History and God will ask you to account for the great opportunity that was given to you. Second, serve the people, not your narrow circle. Serve the people. Number three, be selfless, because naked you came and naked you shall return. We saw it yesterday. Such a great man was buried in a shallow grave, muddy grave, with just a white shroud. The white shroud couldn't have cost maybe 2,000 because of inflation. Awesome. Number four, fear God. Fear God. Because God is the ultimate judge. He is the ultimate judge. And everybody will stand before God for judgment. Thank you for listening. May the soul of President Buhari receive mercy before his maker. May God comfort his family. May God comfort his friends and associates and the rest of Nigerians. God bless Nigeria. Bye. See you next time.